I remember as a young Christian going through this, for me, which was a laborious process of coming into the ability to speak in tongues. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever had to go through as a young disciple. And then when I got through it, I got into this other room, I didn't know what it was for. I'm in this other room and I'm scratching my head saying, what was all that for? I don't really understand it. Many of my friends, I went to a Pentecostal church, many of them spoke in tongues, had an experience with tongues, but never used it. And said that they never used it. They would come home from Bible school and they would be so dry and worn out and kind of burned out. And they would ask me how I had this spiritual reserve, and I said, well, I think it has to do with speaking in tongues. I've been doing it more lately. I've been really going deep in it. I mean, just intentionally setting my watch even for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, trying to practice this. I figured God gave it to me, but I don't even know really why. He gave it to me, and I think he expects me to use it, but I'm not sure what it's all about. I'd been asking him. But I knew there was something happening inside of me that wasn't happening in them, and I really figured it had to do with this issue of tongues. Then I came across this verse in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 18. And Paul said, I thank God, I speak in tongues more than you all. And I remember reading that, but hearing it with my heart. I could hear Paul's deep gratitude. I thank God, I speak in tongues more than you all. And it arrested me. I remember thinking, wow, what does he see in tongues that he's so grateful for, number one. Number two, that causes him to do it so much. I mean, he's saying, I do it more than you Corinthians. And they were kind of driving it in the ditch. They were doing it so much. They were saying it at Grace. Their whole meetings were made up around speaking in tongues. They were taking a good thing to an extreme, which the flesh always does. The flesh always takes a good thing to an extreme. But he wasn't in that same vein. He was saying, I use this, and I do it a lot, and I'm grateful for it. And I remember stopping at this verse and saying, Lord, whatever you did in Paul, do in me. Show me the benefits. Show me what it's about. And where I started doing it, of course, I lived in 1 Corinthians 12, 13, and 14. I just camped there. I just spent a lot of time there. That was a major thing. Went through the book of Acts, but those 3 chapters, I just went deep in them. Secondly, I started speaking in tongues more. I started practicing it. Actually, literally setting my watch, because I'd plan on speaking in tongues a lot, and I'd have this burst of tongues, and I'd pray, and then I'd look at my watch, and like 1 minute had passed, and I'd be so disappointed. It felt like a lot had happened, but really only a minute had passed, and so I tried to go to 2 minutes and 3 minutes and get it up to 5 minutes, and it was an effort. Your mind wanders because your spirit is praying, but your mind is not really fruitful. It's not engaged. And so my mind would wander, and I'd have to bring it back and say, no, we're here to focus on what God might be saying and doing. And so I had no teacher. I didn't have anyone to sit down who was doing this and doing the same thing. I didn't have any peers who were all in this thing together exploring. I felt like I was very much alone. But I wanted to find out what this whole thing with tongues was all about. And he began to teach me. And one of the first things that he showed me was that that there's a profit, a benefit. 1 Corinthians 14:6, this is, now brethren, if I come to you speaking in tongues, what shall I profit you? There has to be a benefit. There has to be a margin, a profit, a gain somehow. 1 Corinthians 12:7 says, but the manifestation of the Spirit is given to each one for the profit of all. And that's where I come up with the phrase, God does nothing for nothing. There's a benefit. There has to be a margin. There has to be a gain in doing this. And God's hidden it in the practice of speaking in tongues, which is, it's kind of ironic. I know a lot of people who speak in tongues. Most of my friends speak in tongues. But I don't know very many people who use it, who intentionally work it into their life as a discipline, where they would say, I do it every day. I figured out a way to, I pray from stoplight to stoplight, or I pray by the mile and pray in tongues, or I start my worship by praying in tongues or singing in tongues. And it's in doing the discipline of speaking in tongues, I think, that you start to find the profit, the margin. Amen?